Climate change is a very real and scary thing that is happening to the world. The way we know climate change and global warming is happening is by focusing on concentrations of CO2 in the air, which at current levels is about 410 ppm.
Gases in the atmosphere, called greenhouse gases, absorb heat and warm the atmosphere around them.
Carbon dioxide is one of many greenhouse gases that contribute to the increased warming of the world, and one of many sectors that emit a large portion of greenhouse gas is the energy sector, due to the increased burning of fossil fuels to keep up with the increased demand of energy.
Other sectors that contribute to carbon dioxide emissions are forestry, agriculture, industry, and transportation. The human activities performed in each sector drastically increase greenhouse gas emissions.
Projected future climate change is something that needs to be seen to believe. ppm will be about 950 in 2100, with current level ppm being at about 410. It is also said that by 2100 there will be a 3 degree Celsius increase in temperature, which might not seem like much, but could lead to a 40 to 70% extinction of all animals on Earth. We need to take action now in order to prevent the world from getting into such a bad place. But you may ask, how do we take action?
Two ways we can take action are adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation offsets effects of carbon dioxide buildup, while mitigation takes action to reduce CO2 concentrations in our atmosphere.
Mitigating means to reduce the amount of emission and stabilize CO2 levels. Mitigation of CO2 will help reduce the vulnerability of many nations as climate changes. At first, the benefit will go to developing countries, but in the long run, it will help and benefit all nations globally.
There are two ways that we can mitigate against climate change. First, we can emit less CO2. Second, we can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through carbon capture and storage, or CCS. CCS captures carbon dioxide before it is released into our atmosphere and transfers it underground via pipelines. Although many countries are attempting to reduce emissions, the emissions continue to grow, and atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are climbing at rates that exceed previous projections, largely because there are few economic incentives for emission reduction, especially in the two largest emitting nations, the US and China. A potential solution to this problem is translating the social cost of carbon into a carbon cost that is paid by the consumer. A carbon cost is the amount the consumer must pay as a tax or part of an emission permit for the emission of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide. Taxation would not only reduce consumption, but also provide an incentive for the development of non-carbon energy sources. Countries can incorporate a carbon tax into this solution. Carbon tax shifts the cost of emissions back onto the emitter. Cost of reducing emissions eventually passes on to the consumers. The net effect of a carbon tax is to raise the price of goods and services by an amount proportional to the amount of greenhouse gases emitted. Incorporating carbon cost and carbon tax into our mitigation solutions encourages less consumption of greenhouse gas intensive goods, the substitution of non-greenhouse gas energy sources, and the development of new technologies. Another way we can mitigate climate change is through energy alternatives. These alternatives include carbon-free and carbon-neutral energy sources. Wind, water, and solar energy are a few examples.
Instead of burning fossil fuels to create more electricity, we can use the sun to make that extra electricity. Using solar panels, we can capture the sun's energy and turn it into electricity without emitting more CO2 into the atmosphere. Ivanpah is a great example of solar use, powering 140 homes at the moment. There is about 14.21 million homes in California, and we have about 400,000 acres of unused land. So technically, with 102 Ivanpahs, we could power all of California solely on solar power. Another renewable source of energy would be water power. Power is made through the force created by falling water on a turbine and spinning it to create electricity. At the moment, it is the most widely used renewable energy source, making about 16% of the world's electricity. With more advancements in technology, we could be able to increase that amount of electricity created by water sources, as well as with a combination of solar energy, it would lead to a significant mitigating effect, leading to the slowing of climate change and global warming. Achieving these goals and mitigating will help us prevent such a devastating event as 2-degree warming. We will also be able to reduce the vulnerability of nations due to climate change. We will also stabilize CO2 levels, which means that the greenhouse effect will not continue to spiral out of control and melt ice to the point of no return. It will also stabilize temperatures, which means there will be little to no extinction,
as well as little to no sea level rise. We need to act now. Fossil fuel reserves have the capacity to boost atmospheric carbon dioxide levels higher and faster than in the last million years. Human land use, construction, pollution, and other constraints make adaptation a different game than it used to be. Species no longer have time to adapt or adjust. To improve adaptive capacities, nations need to incorporate mitigation into their strategies for sustainable development. Mitigation efforts involve global factors. That is why the IPCC makes it clear that nations of the world need to take aggressive and intermediate action to avoid the looming climate change crisis. The best bet for combating climate change is adapting a plan for the future that combines adaptation and mitigation so we can actively reduce the increasing amount of greenhouse gas emissions in the future.